Hi, it's Chris Titley here, and on today's episode of Scoreboard, the podcast, I'm joined by Jonathon Flegg, a founder and director at Freshwater Strategy. I think we're going to call you Jono for the podcast. Jono, welcome to Scoreboard.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me on your podcast, and you're doing great work, mate. It's been awesome to watch you build this thing, and I'm just pleased to be here with you.
Fantastic. Thanks, mate. We're sitting here on Wednesday, the 28th of May, and Wednesday, of course, is Origin Day here in Queensland. We're hosting the Blues tonight. You've got your scarf on. I've got my maroon jumper on. How are you feeling about it all, mate?
Mate, it's always a bit of optimism with Game 1 for Queensland, and despite being deep here within Sydney and New South Wales, I'm flying the flag, which I always do. So we'll see. That enthusiasm will just carry us the whole way through, I suspect. But
yeah, and obviously
Game 1, that's huge, and you can't replace that environment that you've got up there in Lang Park for Game 1. So I'm super excited about it.
Mate, it is. The weather's beautiful. It's a cracking day. It'll be hopefully a cracking game. This podcast will age well if Queensland wins. If Queensland doesn't win, it won't age very well when we edit it and it comes out live. But anyway, mate, I'm going to throw things around a little bit in order for our podcast today. I normally ask our guests about our favourite all-time sporting moment and the scoreboard moment later on in the podcast, but I'm going to go first. I'm hoping that there's a favourite all-time sporting moment that's Origin-related.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, keeping on the Origin theme, if I go right back into the recesses of my experience, the first sporting event that I ever cried at, and there's been a few, but Game 292, Alfie Langer slotting the field goal to win. I was there with my old man as a young boy in the bleachers of the old Lang Park. And I'd never seen anything like it. Being a boy from Redcliffe, we came into the city to watch the game. And mate, that moment has stuck with me ever since. So I guess just sticking on that State of Origin thematic, that's got to be the one for me today.
You touched on a few things there. The old Lang Park, I remember going to some games there. I actually went to some games there with, I think it was 95, with the Southeast Queensland Crushers. I think they played the Bronx there, and it was the Choo 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 themes. I was about 13 at the time, I reckon. And it was a bit of an experiment, the old Crushers back then, but they were an expansion team, and Freshwater Strategy is involved in sport and business. I'd love the listeners out there for you to give a bit of an understanding about what Freshwater Strategy does and your intertwinement with sport and business.
Yeah, no, it's a great business. Obviously, very pleased that we set it up almost 3 years ago now. We've done a lot in that short period as an organisation. I guess you may have heard about us in the media. We tend to make a few waves around the ridges with the work that we do at Freshwater. We've got 3 offices. Our main office is in Sydney. We've got an office in Brisbane and in London as well. Ultimately, we've got some various pillars to the business, but the advisory part of the business, which I look after, focuses on corporate advisory. We do a lot of sport in that. So we also have a big research business. You might see that with the polling work that we do publicly as well. We seem to be fairly well known for the polling work that we do. And then we have a big strat comms and media division as part of Freshwater as well. So whilst we do a load of sports work that we love, it's not all that we do, but we've carved out a real specialty in the sports area over many years. We kind of fell into it, Chris. Myself and the founders of Freshwater all worked previously for another firm, and we were always the black sheep in the business, because rather than having Sky News or ABC playing in our part of the office, we had ESPN playing constantly, and we had a few opportunities there to start to dabble in sport, only because we loved it, and we believed actually what we did, in some of those other areas that I mentioned, translated really well into the sports arena. We do work in politics as well, political advisory work, and I always say there's more politics in sport than actual politics in Australia. So look, we thought we had the wherewithal to have a crack at the sporting area, and we sort of found that when we got in there, we were really good at it. So the first foray that we took into sport a few years ago in 2018 now was we got asked to do a bid for the Macarthur Bulls A-League franchise expansion in the A-League. And it was an interesting one because I remember it was a Saturday night, and our chairman called me up and said, "What are we doing for the next 2 weeks with our team?" And I said, "Well, we're pretty busy." And he said, "We've got 10 days to pull together a compelling bid for the MacArthur Bulls franchise to get in before the deadline was due with the A-League, which if anyone of your listeners has done bid work before, that's a pretty tight turnaround." So we pulled together everybody that we needed to. We had a 24-hour bid room, graphic designers, we had financial modelers, we had everybody in the room, and we pulled it all together. And once it was lodged and we were successful, the feedback from David Gallop, who many of your listeners would know, who was the head of the A-League at the time, said that was the best sports bid he'd ever seen in his career. And we were left thinking, hang on a second, we pulled that together in 10 days. How could that be the best that David Gallop's ever seen, having been head of 2 major sporting codes in Australia? So at that point, it dawned on us that we probably had some special sauce, and we've obviously done a lot of work, particularly in the sports bid space since.
Yeah, the 24-hour bid room. There you go. What was the thinking? How did the structure go? What did you get? Did you get some Chinese takeaway? Did you not sleep? What happened there?
Yeah, look, bids are not for everybody. I always say that. It's real shoulder to the wheel stuff. That said, once it's in and you've won, it's the most amazing feeling when you've actually achieved something like that. But yeah, look, the reason why we had limited time on that one was that if some of your listeners who are into A-League or soccer can recall, there was a whole range of kind of bids from all around the country, and there were 2 actual competing bids from Southwest Sydney. One of them was set up by Lane Walker, who provided an incredible balance sheet and obviously had a massive interest in that part of Sydney, that growth area of Sydney in the southwest corridor. And then there was another competing bid that had come from a range of property developers in that part of the world who may not have been as successful as Lane Walker, who's a rich lister in Australia, but were utterly fascinated and passionate about their football. So there were 2 competing bids for the same territory in the A-League. So our point of view, our argument to these 2 competing bids, the Lane Walker-backed bid and the other one, who Gino Mara, who's now the chairman of the club, was involved in, was that if you bid against each other and work against each other for the same terrain, you're more than likely going to lose. But if you join forces and come up with essentially a mega bid, you're going to get the best of both worlds, and you're more than likely going to win because the A-League was very interested in that fast-growing southwest corridor of Sydney. So by the time that Lane Walker's lawyers and all the lawyers had picked apart a JV agreement, managed to get it all inked up, that's why we only had the 10 days to pull together the actual bid, because it took that long for the lawyers to put together the JV on that exercise. So, look, lots of fun. Again, not for everybody, but the camaraderie that you build, sort of relationships you have for a lifetime when you've done a sports bid with people and you've been put under that kind of pressure.
Jono, I'm curious as to know who your client is there, or is it a consortium that's paying you to do it? Is the league paying you to do it? Like, where the sort of customers come from before we get into some of the other stories about some of the other bids of the sporting teams?
Yeah, typically, as a business, we'll work for a consortia or consortium who are putting forward a bid for expansion. One area that we've had a lot of success in, the Daily Telegraph is called Freshwater, the club makers. We tend to specialise. I mean, we do a lot of work in sport now, but if we have a real sweet spot, it's around expansion bids. So it's typically the consortium who will engage us in that situation. We've also been very lucky, Chris, I think, because the timing of us building that specialty in the business also coincided with a massive period of expansion in most of our big leagues in Australia. And a lot of that has been driven by streaming services. Your listeners will recall the advent of Super League in Australia and then the rationalisation that occurred, reducing the number of clubs that occurred after that. period. But with the expansion of streaming services, most of the broadcasters now are feverishly looking for more and more content and are willing to pay for it. So the major leagues are now, most of them are to varying degrees looking at expansion opportunities. So the fact we started dipping our toe into that type of work and specialising in it around about the time that streaming services were becoming a big part of the broadcast world was very opportune, I think.
And Jono, speaking of Super League and looking back in Australian sporting history, there's been a number of teams that have sort of come and gone over the time. How's your knowledge of that in different aspects? Can I trivia you on some old Super League teams? Are you pretty good and au fait with the history of Australian sport?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, I guess not to premeditate a conversation around the Bears expansion for WA, but one area we've done a real deep dive in on recently is certainly the experience of the Western Reds at the time of the Super League. You remember Julian O'Neill and all the players that they had out there. It was actually really successful. It was actually one of the franchises that probably should have continued in any normal world. Had incredible fan base, incredible kind of involvement from the community in WA. It was financially sustainable as a franchise. So it was unfortunate that the Western Reds went by the wayside, but there is still a cohort of folks out there who are diehard Western Reds fans. You see them at Magic Round and elsewhere. They're still out there, but I think what's happening with Perth Bears is awesome because it's tapping into that old Western Reds fan base.
Yeah, and also the North Sydney. There was a couple of teams that come to mind: the Adelaide Rams, a couple in the NBL back when I was growing up. There was the Geelong Supercats, also the Southeast Melbourne Spectres, I believe, before they became the Magic, which was kind of like I didn't really know what a Spectre was growing up, but you sort of said it. And a bit of trivia for you. Gold Coast, the Titans, what names have they had in the past?
Mate, I was thinking Seagulls, Wally Lewis.
The Seagulls, Wally Lewis, Seagulls. Yep.
Go to the Twin Towns and have a great time down there, mate.
And I think they were the Giants as well. Were they the Giants as well? I can't remember.
Giants, yeah. I think you're going back away with that one. But I definitely remember the Seagulls, mate. You don't see too many Seagulls jerseys rocking around anymore.
That's right.
Unfortunate reality. Yes. I'm sure there's someone has got one somewhere. It's probably worth a lot of money.
That's right. And speaking of the Crushers as well, back in the day, the South East Queensland Crushers. Speaking of closer to home, and one of the things that Freshwater and yourself, probably more so yourself in terms of the involvement in the Dolphins bid into the NRL. We had Rupert McCall on recently on the podcast, a staunch Redcliffe Dolphins fan, been there through and through, probably even written poems about it, I'm sure. You want to talk about the history of the Dolphins, your involvement, you mentioned early on you're a Redcliffe boy, and how that early discussion, fly on the wall, where that came from.
Yeah, it's a great question. This one was a labour of love for me, only because I'm from Redcliffe and I spent a lot of time at the club as a kid. I distinctly remember one time leaving the club and my old man sort of speaking in riddles a little bit, but he said, one day we're going to make the top league as a kid. And that stuck with me. That really did stick with me. Unfortunately, the Super League rise and collapse cost the Dolphins probably decades of lost opportunity playing at the top national level. But when the NRL started to get into a position of expansion and had signalled pretty clearly that their interest was in another Brisbane team, that set off a train of thinking in me and my team around how we should be working with the Dolphins to get them in. As I said, it was a labour of love, but we approached the Phins. I think it really got a lot of traction when Terry Reader was appointed by the club. He was the CCO of the Broncos at the time. Terry remains a very good friend of mine and colleague. The minute he was brought across from the Broncos and the guys put him on, he ostensibly was given the responsibility of pulling this all together. And once we started talking with Terry, it all started moving pretty quick. And my pitch to Terry was pretty simple. I said, Terry, we're only going to get one shot at this. And if we mess it up, and we don't do it as best as we possibly can, the Dolphins will be waiting another 30 years. And I said, growing up in Redcliffe, I don't think we can afford to wait another 30 years. So, we had those conversations early on. We met the chairman, Jonesy, and Spud, who was the CEO of the Dolphins. And I think the fact I was from Redcliffe certainly helped with the pitch. And obviously the work that we've done with the A-League and some of the other sports previously as well. But it was kind of one of those ones you just want to be able to tell your grandkids about. You go through your career, and there's only going to be so many things you're going to remember once it's all finished, and that's one that's going to stick with me forever.
Just going behind the scenes a little bit in terms of putting a bid together, obviously multiple stakeholders, and in sort of obviously there's some more weighty than others when it comes to stakeholders. How do you consider them all? And also, there's some stakeholders every now and then you're like, oh, well, we need to make sure that they're on par as well, and the buy-ins there.
There's a lot of stakeholders in an expansion bid, and you need to be consulting with them all. You need to be drawing them in to the extent that they're able to give real tangible support and get behind the bid. I guess if we just use the example of the Dolphins, I think we got letters of support from 26 MPs. We crossed across 3 local government areas, many of which, including Moreton Bay and Sunshine Coast, are some of the fastest growing areas in the country. It was really important for the NRL, as you'd appreciate, to see that government stood firmly behind the bid, not only in terms of the words it used, but with hard dollars towards infrastructure to advance the game. That was certainly something that the NRL was looking at. So beyond that, you've got community stakeholders, you've got potential sponsors. We were lucky enough, we were able to sign up, I think, about $6.3 million of potential sponsors even prior to the licence being issued, which was a major signal to the NRL to say that this thing was highly commercial, that there was a pool of potential sponsors that were willing to stand up and be counted and get behind the club. So that was very attractive, I think, to the NRL. And then more broadly, you've got media partners, of course, as well. Getting a niche, getting a little angle in on the Brisbane media market was really important. Having Triple M come in early on that was really important. So and then obviously, usually there's the financial backers. With the Dolphins, they're blessed. They're sitting on multiple hectare site out there. They're sitting on over $100 million of assets. So unlike a normal consortium, the Dolphins were kind of sitting quite well in a financial setting. Were able to prove to the NRL that they could sustain those finances to grow the game. But that's not always the case. Some consortiums are put together by high net worths or other private equity interests, so you need to pull them together and be able to substantiate the case of sustaining a club through the leaner years until you start actually making money. The last thing a league wants to do is to have to step in and save a franchise from itself in the early days because it couldn't get itself up and running. So that's a really important part, particularly from those consortia bid arrangements.
And the plan, is it a 5-year plan, 10-year plan that you push to them? And I suppose once they've been accepted into the main league and they're going along nicely, there's some variations and things change and macro conditions change. There's things like COVID and there's other things. How do you continually does the league monitor it, and do you play a part in that sort of like, well, actually we're 3 years way through the 5-year plan and we're beating expectations, or the opposite, 3 years through and going, actually we're financially in a little bit of a hole?
Yeah, the typical time frame, Chris, is around 5 years. So 5-year financial model is the meaningful time frame. You obviously have a range of assumptions that you need to build in there around ticketing revenue, merchandise sales, memberships, all the rest of it. So it's pretty hard to see out past 5 years for the average club. But it's a really good exercise to go through. It's what I always say about a bid for a new sports club is it's not only a bid, it's really actually a case of forced planning to prove to the league that we've actually gone through and built a plan. So that when Terry Reader became the CEO of the Dolphins, it was a really easy exercise. He actually started putting on his senior executives, bringing them all in, bringing on the staff. Well, the plan was already written. And it was fun to watch when that first game happened with the Dolphins against the Roosters at Suncorp Stadium, and a lot of fans were utterly blown away by this new entity that had entered the NRL ecosystem. and they couldn't believe the level of fandom, the level of organisation, even the branding, which we spent a lot of time agonising over the dolphin, over exactly how to get that dolphin exactly right, so it appealed to not only men but women and kids as well. But that was all planned for. So it just goes to show, if you plan, you can deliver. And I would actually almost go so far to say is the planning that you go through to put forward a compelling bid. I should have brought it for you. Actually, it's quite a large document. Is actually probably better and stronger planning than a lot of incumbent clubs go through for their own growth. It's really important thing to make a point about that.
Well, I was sticking on the rugby league topic. You did mention the Perth Bears before. Do you want to talk about that and the name, the history, and I suppose again, the rigorous planning involved in submitting a bid to the NRL for a new expansion team, geographically a bit further away probably than the Redcliffe Dolphins?
Yeah, absolutely. The WA market's a fantastic rugby league market. We have a little saying that it puts the N into the National Rugby League. You can't really be national without WA in the ecosystem. Whilst it is generally considered an AFL state by many, there is a huge diaspora of folks who are living in Perth, either from the East Coast, New Zealanders, South Africans, English people who are living in that part of the world. And also there's a great quite a strong rugby league community in WA outside of the diaspora community that are based in there. I probably shouldn't call it diaspora. A lot of people are from Australia. But you know what I'm saying. WA folks, they think differently. They're very parochial out there, but there is a lot of people from other parts of the country and the world who prefer either rugby league or rugby union. So we've seen that as an obvious entree into building support for a club. But in the first instance, the process that was run was a little bit different by the NRL this time around. It was they didn't geographically ring fence southeast Queensland this time. They really threw it open, and they said they were open to bids from pretty much anywhere. As your listeners will be aware, PNG have been successful as well. There was a range of bidders that came forth from New Zealand as well. So there were other folks putting their hands up, but I think the great strength of WA is it's a market that has huge commercial potential, huge fan potential, and it's an underserviced market in terms of sporting content. WA folks love sport, but they're quite limited at the moment in terms of how much sport content they have available to them. So playing at a HCF Park, we think it's going to be, we're going to get some good crowds out there. The NRL's process that they entered into was looking for consortia interest. The consortia that we worked with led by Peter Cummins, who you may be aware is the founder of Cash Converters, a very, very prominent West Australian businessman. We worked with him and his consortia on the bid. We had very strong backing from the WA government. In particular, Premier Cook, I need to say, despite being the Premier of WA, Premier Cook is a leaguey, loves his rugby league. And from the Premier down, this was a Premier's level priority to get this franchise up and running. In the end, the NRL has taken a slightly different approach to not award the actual license to a consortium itself. But as you will have seen, the NRL will initially sort of incubate the club, and it will move forward like that with full WA government backing. So we're just proud to see a great result with a WA franchise coming into the league in 2027.
Fantastic. On recent podcasts, I've been chatting to the CEO and coach of the Jack Jumpers out of the NBL, and more recently, the Jack Jumpers got acquired, the whole business, by a private equity group based out of Brisbane. The PE interest, venture capital, high net worth in sport, very prominent in the US. A lot of different team ownership by high net worth individuals in Premier League, etc. Not as much and prevalent in Australia. Do you want to talk about some of the experience that you're seeing overseas, and I suppose what you think Australia may look like in the future with potential investment from external parties as an example, Cricket Australia, we had Alistair Dobson on talking about the Big Bash, and it's owned by Cricket Australia. I'm sure there'd be interest financially there. But some of your experience, and I suppose a bit of comment on Australia.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Chris. This is a trend that we're really long on at Freshwater, is the increasing level of private equity involved in sport. That's obviously much more normal, I would say, overseas, and it's a newer thing for Australia, particularly for our tier one sports, which are probably the least likely to have private equity ownership in the current environment. But we think this trend is coming to Australia and will come to Australia in increasing frequency. Probably the two trends that we have identified are certainly the more sophisticated elements of private equity, right? So I think if we talked about private investment in sport previously, it was always the high net worth model. The wealthy businessman or woman who had made a lot of money in another industry, who wanted a trophy asset or a plaything, who could afford to invest in a club. We're now seeing, probably the more sophisticated private equity where, sports clubs and sports leagues are now seen as an asset in their own right and are expected to provide a traditional private equity return. So that's probably the first trend. The other one is multi-sport ownership and multi-club ownership. In terms of like managing risk and also spreading expertise. This is, again, a trend we're seeing overseas where owners of clubs are picking up various assets across different codes, right? So, and, they're developing a level of IP that they can deploy to help professionalise and actually get better returns out of clubs. So they're taking learnings from one sport, bringing them across to another. And then also just managing risk, right? Because, not every, whenever you're investing in a league, your fortunes are somewhat tied to how that league is going to turn out over the medium to longer term. So you can spread your risk across multiple clubs and multiple leagues as well. So, and then obviously, the kind of the Saudi-backed kind of initiatives, rebel leagues, if you like Live Golf, like Professional Fighters League, who are taking on the UFC globally. So certainly a lot of that Middle Eastern money is something to watch as well as it arrives in Australia.
And I've also recently had Victoria Denholm from Wallamai Capital Group about their acquisition or majority acquisition of the WNBL. So we're talking leagues here, not just teams. And the family interest is also in Hoops Capital that owns some of the teams. I'm curious to know about new leagues and leagues popping up. And you just mentioned then the Professional Fighters League, the PFL, and your involvement in that and what the benefits are of starting a league and starting from scratch and all the things that come with it over time.
Yeah, so we're quite involved in the development of PFL Oceania. So for your listeners who aren't as acquainted with MMA, UFC obviously looms large. It has incredible market share, particularly in the 18 to 35-year-old category. It's the fastest growing new sport in terms of spectator interest globally. The competitor to the UFC with Dana White is Pete Murray's, who is the CEO of PFL, also run out of New York over there in the States. The money that's come behind getting PFL out of the ground is Saudi backed PIF money in relation to the PFL. So they've got tremendous balance sheet to be able to invest and take on the likes of a UFC. But where it's different, there's probably quite a few different ways that they're actually tackling UFC. First of all, they've got a federated model so that each of the regions, continents, if you like, have their own independent leagues that have their own ownership structure, and where you can actually develop talent in local areas, right? So in Oceania, we can actually develop talent who currently have limited options in Australia. We can develop them a proper ecosystem for fighters and talent development within Australia itself. That also goes for Africa, MENA with the Middle East, Europe, where it's PFL is really doing amazing things, North and South America and Asia. So the various different regions that PFL will operate allows us to provide more content locally, provide a better ecosystem for the development of talent. locally, and then we move forward like that. But critically, the other kind of point of difference is that the UFC, many of your listeners may not be aware, but do not pay the fighters terribly well. Only about 16% of the league's total proceeds go back to the athletes. And there's, I can think of very few other sports where you get that level of lack of investment in the athletes themselves. It means that unless you're an utter superstar in UFC, you are going to be struggling financially on every account. So the only other comparable competition around the world where I think it is genuinely hard for the athletes to make any form of a living is the only comparable I would say is tennis. When you're outside the top 100 in global tennis, your existence, your financial existence becomes very tenuous, becomes very difficult. So the UFC only provides a small amount of its overall revenue back to investing in fighter contracts, whereas the PFL has put aside serious money to attract the content across, a little bit like Live Golf. So they're able to sign up quality fighters and build that ecosystem out whilst maintaining, contracts that will be enticing for the fighters to join the new competition.
Jono, you talk about Australia being obviously a very strong sporting nation, and you're talking about broadcast, and then you're seeing Netflix enter, and you're seeing all these other large streaming services enter the play with different, different packages and different types of streaming services. And locally, you've got things like KO and KO Mini. You've got the US sports that are coming over here. You've got the NFL coming. You've got the NBA exhibition game. You've got, even my son to a degree is very strong and understanding what's going on in the IPL, which is something which I probably am not au fait with, only because of the timing, etc. But he gets up and watches the minis and follows the teams. Who are you competing with, I suppose, or where is Australia landing in the future of sport when you've got these big global sports in the Premier League, etc., where the access is much closer with the content generation, not when you and I were growing up and we probably had 3 hours in the wide world of sports on a Saturday afternoon to kind of watch our stars or get a brief glimpse of Michael Jordan, for instance. But now with social media and content, this is a pretty competitive market. Where do you think Australia's sport is heading in terms of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess the example I would use is probably when you and I were at school. Back in the day, we were collecting NBA cards. Most of us had never seen an NBA game. It just wasn't available. Whereas now with streaming, global content, it is truly a global marketplace for this type of thing. I think it is a little bit like the world before free trade. We had protectionism, and now we're moving into a world of free trade, where people can just gravitate to the content that they like to see, which means that certain leagues, like particularly NFL out of the States, or the NBA, or as you mentioned, IPL, all these leagues from around the world, obviously European-based soccer leagues, that is very readily accessible, and the fans for all those leagues are going through the roof. The opportunity is for Australian sport to go global as well, and I think the NRL is a great example of that, where we're taking what we're doing with NRL internationally as well. So we just need to be prepared to compete in that global marketplace. We are known as a great sporting nation. The other thing to say is that there is ample opportunity for fans to be fans of multiple sports. We talk about it regularly at Freshwater, which is the rise of the multi-sport fan. Back in the day, fans probably were more, you probably had a greater level of fandom for less sports, maybe even just one sport. Now you're finding, perhaps more casualisation of fan support across a range of different sporting content. But people, they're just spreading their interest across a wider range of sports. So what we're seeing is that one league, being a supporter of one league, is not necessarily going to cannibalise interest in another league. And you're seeing some brand affiliation almost. You look at what the NRL has done with the Vegas round, and actually watching the partnership with UFC over there has been quite interesting, because the Venn diagram of the average UFC fan and the average NRL fan is pretty close, or at least potentially could be very close. So you're actually seeing the leagues, come together and start partnerships on that basis, because they're not actually going to cannibalise each other at all. So I think we are living in a new world order when it comes to that marketplace, but it's an exciting one for Australian sport.
Absolutely. And then you've got core products like we talked about the Origin tonight. It's a Wednesday night. It's always been a Wednesday night. They've got their slot. You've always got the Boxing Day test match on Boxing Day. It's pretty hard to compete with an alternative product. You've got the, as you mentioned, Vegas round, which is a new thing. The NBA's done the in-season cup. You've got Magic round in NRL. You've got Gather round in the AFL. These ideas have come from somewhere. What's your thinking? Do you guys come up with some of these ideas as well and suggest things and rivalries, etc.? The Collingwood Brisbane Lions on Easter Thursday, etc. These things are now bigger and better than they were before. What's Freshwater's thinking around some of these types of events per se within the sports?
Yeah, look, we kick around all sorts of ideas here, about how we can do things better. Of the many that you mentioned, I mean, they certainly didn't emanate from our business necessarily, but I think the goal is to continue to import, particularly the best of the ideas of how things are done overseas. There are elements of Australian sport that do need to be shaken up. There's no question about that, and I think a lot of those ideas are going to come from overseas. So, that's probably how I would answer that question. I mean, I just think about some of the really creative ways that we launched the Dolphins in particular. And I think you might have said it on a previous podcast, Chris, but like drawing the sponsors in to a greater degree rather than just sort of putting together a pro forma kind of standard sponsorship agreement and they sign it and they send a big check multiple times a year. Actually getting really creative about the co-branding opportunities. I always marvel at what Budget Direct have done with the Dolphins around the Phins that have been given out at the sports. Dwayne Bennett, the long lost cousin of Wayne Bennett, who has his own social media page. That's all Budget Direct. It's all part of the Budget Direct sponsorship, but it actually required them to be really creative. Now, what I've heard on the grapevine is that in terms of ROI for Budget Direct, that's been one of the strongest ever campaigns they've ever had in the history of the business. But it actually required some creative thinking between the sponsor and the club to go, okay, what can we do here that's not BAU?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think your reference to I think it was Wingstop in the US had this play with the Detroit Pistons. And I think there's also it was a particular chicken restaurant where if you missed 2 free throws, you got a free chicken burger. And one of the blokes at the end of the season in a non-important game sort of missed the first one and he was a terrible free throw shooter. And he sort of went to the crowd like this and then kind of missed the second one and got a big cheer and sort of did the thumbs up. So the activation of brands and as the importance of a good long-term sponsor. I was talking to Mal Watts at the Bullets about it and Christine at the Jack Jumpers. When brands look at sport now, do they come to you? Do they think about where they can play? And do you think there's the growing rise of pools of brands that go, actually, there's some activations we can do here? What are you thinking about that in terms of the money in sport and the sponsorship in sport?
Yeah, look, in terms of a service to the market, we do that work at Freshwater. For most corporates, even for larger corporates, sports sponsorship is firmly outside of BAU for even some of the larger corporations around the place. So working with people who can think creatively and also understand the value of sponsorship in maybe a more detailed, nuanced way. I mean, when you're seeing enough of this come through your organisation, you do get a pretty good understanding of what value looks like from a sponsorship point of view. So helping corporations go through that process and thinking creatively about the co-branding activation opportunities that could be possible between the brand alignment is definitely a type of work we do. Very proud of it.
I've got one final question on sport before we delve into you a little bit, Jono. It's about the scheduling, the calendar. It's talked a lot about how you fill all these things in and the Friday night slot versus the Thursday night, and we've tried Monday night, and we've done, AFL has this, and NRL has this, and Premier. How do you think about the calendar as well? And onto your point about the multi-sport viewer that can sit down and watch a Friday night footy NRL game that's been around for many, many years, but maybe flick over and watch the AFL at the MCG, which is also packed out at the same time.
Yeah, well, I think the answer to that question, Chris, is just around how do you actually find new time slots that aren't already crowded. So, and to bring it back to the WA opportunity with rugby league, that actually opens up multiple new time slots on the East Coast for content, which is really exciting. And so, yeah, I think, looking at some of the stuff that happens over in America, I think there probably is a bit of a second look around even looking at Monday Night Football potentially, which is done in the NFL. So I think from a rugby league point of view, there's a lot of learnings from the way the NFL do things in the States. But yeah, just finding those new time slots, it's tough.
Yeah, I remember watching that documentary of Vince McMahon on Monday Night Raw as well. Like they introduced that Monday Night Wrestling slot, which was obviously very successful. They tried. Who was it? Was it NRL tried the Monday night thing for a while, didn't they?
They did. But
Yep.
I suspect there might be an opportunity to start to look at that again.
Yeah, and Thursday is AFL and NRL now, broadly speaking, but mainly. But yeah, no, new time spots, sport 24/7. As a fan, we would love it. As a player, maybe not so in terms of the injury prevention and management, etc. But hey, Jonathan, we've talked about your all-time favourite sporting moment, but I also ask guests about their scoreboard moment, which is a moment in life which is pretty vivid. It's like a Kodak moment or an Instagram shot where you go, oh, I remember that. I remember that moment in my life, and from there, things change for the better or for the worse. But it's something that's pretty vivid in your memory. Jono, what's your scoreboard moment?
Uh, if I'm obviously overlooked for a moment, married with three kids, which has to take preeminent spot on that list, of course, Chris.
Absolutely.
My wife would kill me if I said anything different. The probably the one I just think just keeping in the vein of the conversation. It was an amazing turning point for me when the Dolphins got up. Yeah, so for me, Chris, I mean, the bit that I probably underestimated was the feeling I was going to have when that announcement was finally made. As I said, it was beyond anything I've ever done in my career in terms of what it felt like the importance of it was, not only to me but to a whole community of people. And the thing about putting a club in an area like Redcliffe, like many parts of the country, is it's the ultimate way, in my mind, to support the building of community spirit. And you can build hospitals and schools and all those sorts of things, and they certainly happen as you build communities. But to give a community a sense of pride, a rallying point around a national sporting franchise is the ultimate in my mind. And so the bit that really got to me was knowing how important it was to me to see the Dolphins go back into top flight football after many decades in the wilderness. But then knowing what that meant to everyone, all the folks up in Redcliffe, that whole corridor north of Brisbane, to provide them with a magnificent team to rally around. For me, that was irreplaceable, and I think I underestimated the feeling for when that announcement was finally made, and it sort of spurred me on to do more. Quite frankly, I mean, it's been a great turning point in our business where we've just continued to double down and do so much sport work because, quite frankly, it's a great feeling. It gives you a lot more joy and pride than in a lot of things you do in your professional career when you can be part of that moment when a birth of a new club. I mean, what a privilege.
What a great moment too, and this year it's all very even. Let's hope the Dolphins tick themselves up. A great win last week. I think it was 44-8 against the Canterbury team that's sitting up there. So it's wide open. So hopefully one day you get that finals, and one day you get the flag as well. But congratulations on that moment, Jono. Our previous guest, Christy Jenkins, talked about her scoreboard moment and her all-time favourite sporting moment, and one of the three sports that she played before she went into now running a startup accelerator, was beach volleyball. So as part of the Scoreboard Scramble, which is a new segment that I've introduced to our guests, is to put them on the spot on a Wednesday morning to get that brain thinking. And you're going to have to spell a word backwards. 2 out of 3, I think, have got it so far. So there's no pressure at all, by the way. So I'll give you 20 seconds, but you're going to have to spell the word or words beach volleyball backwards because that's one of Christy Jenkins' sport. And you've got 20 seconds to do so, Jono. So I'm going to give you 20 seconds to spell the words beach volleyball starting now.
Okay, so ball, LLAB, volley, YELL, Beach, HCAEB. How's that?
LLABYELLOVHCEAB. You nailed it.
Fantastic. How
Correct
good.
on Monday.
Finish on a high.
Finished on a high, mate. Jono Flegg, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day today to talk about what you're up to in the world of business and sport, what Freshwater Strategy has done in the past, is doing currently, as well as behind the scenes, looks into some of the most important expansion teams and also important moments of particular codes' history and changing the sport and changing the way the sport is played forever. And you can be very proud of some of the work that you've done thus far, with obviously a lot of more work to come. I look forward to continuing to follow the progress of yourself as well as Freshwater Strategy, and look forward to catching up.
Thanks, Chris. And obviously I'm going to follow your podcast with interest as well, mate. So continue doing what you're doing, and thanks. Thanks for having me on.